Welcome to today's presentation on keys to building a high-performing cybersecurity team. My name is Sarah McChesney, and on behalf of ProTech Training, I will serve as your host for today. Before I introduce you to our guests, just a few housekeeping items. This presentation will last approximately 45 minutes, with additional time reserved for Q&A at the end. During the webinar, please feel free to enter any of your questions into the question area, which may be found within the control panel in the top right-hand corner of your screen. Today's presentation is being recorded, and in the coming days, you will receive an email containing the recording link. Now, a little bit about our guests. Focal Point Academy has trained 20,000 of the most elite cybersecurity workers in the US, from both commercial and government, and they know what it takes to build a world-class cyber team. Justin Avery is a cyber workforce development subject matter expert at Focal Point. His role there is overseeing a national team of cybersecurity workforce development sales representatives and sales engineers. Justin, the mic is all yours.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and thank you everybody for joining us today. That was a lovely introduction. I am very happy to be here with all of you today to talk about building a high-performing cybersecurity team. I am not alone. I am here with the brains behind the operation, Mr. Julian Smith. He is the Director of Workforce Development, which effectively means that he has his hands in our curriculum and designing our programs, the content that we teach, as well as our instructors and how they operate. He is really the person who is point on just about everything we do from that world, and I'm thrilled to have him here today to present to you our solutions. I want to talk a little bit before we get into that, though, about Focal Point and ProTech. We are very, very proud to partner with ProTech, and we have for several years now. And our offering together really allows us to focus on the end-to-end cyber skills development, the road from getting into cybersecurity into where you start to get into our content, which is a little higher level and more designed for the cybersecurity professional looking to take quantum leaps in their development. But our partnership together really lets us look at security teams overall from technology perspectives and skills perspectives, and really bring to their customers a really exciting way to develop your people holistically, as opposed to just focusing on certain narrow aspects of their development. And we're very excited to be here today, and we can't thank ProTech enough for having us. I also want to dive a little deeper into who we are. Sarah touched on some of these things. But Focal Point Academy, for over a decade now, has been developing cybersecurity professionals. Our background for the first decade or so of our existence was almost exclusively in the US federal arena. And in the last several years, we've actually pivoted to the commercial arena with tremendous success. Some of the people that have gone on record and talked about our work are people like Cisco and HPE and Target and Expedia, who have come out and talked very fondly about the work we've done and spoken very highly about the way that we've helped understand their teams from a skills perspective and to develop them moving forward with a very prescriptive model. We've screened over 1,000 people this year alone. Our instructors are incredibly highly regarded, and we teach both virtually and in person, although obviously this year almost everything that we've done has been in a virtual model. But now that you have a little bit of background on us, I want to turn the microphone over to Mr. Julian Smith to talk about the workforce of 2021. Julian, floor is yours.
Thank you, Justin, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, good evening, wherever you may be. And thank you, Sarah, as well, for introducing us. So I'm going to share in a couple of different areas here around this topic of building a high-performing team. And the first is to look at where we are right now. What's changed in the last year? What are some of the problems facing, whether it's managers, recruiters, personnel, boots on the ground personnel in security teams. And then we'll talk about some high-level models, how we actually, how we do workforce development and models that you can implement yourselves, ways that you can start to kind of shrink the gap and see team performance improve. So I'm going to kind of caveat this and say I'm more than happy for this to be, I was going to say a conversation. You can't actually speak to us, so I don't quite mean it in that sense. But if you've got questions as we go along, I will try and keep an eye on it. Justin's going to be our question moderator, but I'll try and keep an eye on things and jump in and answer things as we go. If you have questions as we're on our way, you don't have to hold them till the end. So some of these things that we're going to talk about are probably very familiar to you if you work in this arena. Some of them may well be things that you know, but it's sort of kind of good to have a reminder that you're not the only one dealing with them, for sure. And some of them may be new thoughts or new ideas. So just bear that in mind as we talk about these things. This won't be all net new to everyone. And the biggest one, the most obvious one, of course, is for anyone who's involved in managing, leading, or even just being a part of the cyber workforce. There is a large and growing skill gap or worker shortage. And unfortunately, what we're seeing at the moment is that both ends of that gap are going in the wrong direction, right? The demand is rising quickly and the supply is actually shrinking effectively. So it's a double-edged problem. It's nothing new. It's a problem that has been around for a while. We'll look at some statistics here in a little bit just to kind of give you an idea, just some numbers, an idea of how big this problem is, but also why that's important, like how it affects you as an organization. We don't, in your individual organizations, you don't need to know what the high level statistics are. You don't need to know how big the problem is globally, but we are going to talk about, well, how would that affect me in my organization? What are some things that I need to be aware of? Secondly, this goes without saying, but we're going to say it anyway, that things have changed a lot in the last year, right? The threat surface has changed massively. There's now we have a distributed workforce, much more than it was before. Some portion of that is and will be starting to come back into physical office spaces and facilities over the next, several months and years probably, and some of it never will. Right, and we've seen this across our customer base. We've already seen a spectrum of companies that have decided to shut down major centers that they have and effectively allow their workforce to go and work from wherever they want to, and just move to a completely distributed workforce model. And then we've seen some that are maybe shutting down regional or sort of outlying offices and keeping major regional centers, and some that are, by necessity, because of the nature of their business, are working as quickly as they can to get back to an on-site physical presence for their entire workforce. And this goes, of course, for the security teams as well as the rest of the organization, those performing whatever the central business function is of the organization. So if you run a security team, I'm sure you have felt this a lot over the last year, that not only do you now have workers who are teleworking from home, or well, I was going to say Starbucks, but they're probably not in Starbucks at the moment, wherever. But you not only have that to deal with, and the added attack surface that brings, and the added security constraints that you need to be aware of, but your security team itself often has been dispersed, and they have to be able to get access to platforms, tools, dashboards, whatever it may be, in a secure fashion from remote locations, whilst their 9-year-old is doing math next to them at the kitchen table or whatever it may be. And then I think the third thing that is really going to come out this year, that happened as a result of the last 12 months, but we haven't really felt it or seen the impact yet, is just the built up demand for training and development. So, we have one of the security managers that we work with regularly, gave us a quote recently, basically saying, he wasn't really able to develop his people at all last year, and he's ready to go nuts this year. He can't wait to get, whether it's budget constraints, just time and availability, he's really excited to get back to the kind of, or past the level of worker development that we were doing with their team prior to the COVID pandemic. And so there will be this kind of this bubble appearing through this year, for sure. We're expecting, based on what we've seen, we're expecting this year, this may disappoint some of you, but we're expecting this year to see a lot of turnover in cyber positions. It's been an industry that has typically always had high turnover, right? In cybersecurity operations in particular, we see average annual turnover of around about 45%. That's a huge number. Right, and it's very costly to organizations, not just financially in terms of the recruitment costs and the training costs, but also all of that domain knowledge, tribal knowledge that's going out the door as people leave. It's just very costly to the effectiveness of operations, and I'm sure you folks have probably all felt that a lot. And whilst maybe during the last year things have stayed somewhat stable in that sense, it's not really been a year where lots of people have been out looking for new positions. We're expecting that to kind of come back with a vengeance this year. So there are lots of challenges that impact the cyber workforce in general, and we've got a few of them on a slide here just to look at. I'm not going to plow into detail of all of them, but just to give you an idea of some of the things that are out there, and again, maybe reassure you that you're not alone. If you're running a team, or if you're part of a team and you're experiencing these things, then I just want to, like I said, reassure you that this is a sort of regional, national, and international problem. The one I think I really want to focus on the most is this top left, the burnout factor, right? Just how big this number is. So in surveys, 65% of security analysts have considered a career change due to stress at work. Now, it's no surprise to us that SOC analysts are stressed because we have massively exploding volumes of data to deal with. We now have very diversified platforms that we're talking about, and that job is just getting harder and harder. But that is a huge number. If you run a team, let's say you run a team of 6 people, that means on average, 4 of your 6 people have considered not just a job change, but a career change. Like they want to be out of this career field because of the level of stress that it puts on people. And I was actually just reading yesterday an article. I'm based in the US now, but an article from the UK on the BBC about how university students are starting to shun IT and cyber-based courses. The uptick is not as strong as it has been previously because of the perceived difficulty, the perceived burden or stress of going into that career field. Some of the other things that are challenges they're challenges to any relatively new industry, and the cybersecurity industry is a new industry. But excuse me, some of the other ones certainly are a lack of diversity. Right, I'm very conscious of the fact that as I sit here and talk to you today, I'm a 40-something-year-old white male from a fairly privileged background that had a very high-quality education, degree in computer science from a very good university, widely reputable university, and launched into my career that way. That is by no means the sole path into cybersecurity. In fact, there is a large shift in recruitment at the moment away from requiring degrees for cybersecurity workers, and we'll touch a little bit more on that as we get into kind of the models and things as well. I think it'd be worth just mentioning why that is. And what the key attributes are that we're really looking for. But certainly at the moment, there is a large diversity problem in the cybersecurity workforce in general. Budget is an obvious one, right? This past year has seen a lot of training budgets cut. It's one of those things that it's sort of fairly easy for senior leadership to cut and feel like there's no impact to the business. And in the immediate term, there probably isn't, but it's the kind of thing that starts to build an effect over time. So that's something, like I said, we're going to see, I think, definitely see an impact for this year as folks want to get back into training programs and development programs and further their skills. The level at which organizations are able to provide opportunities for that is going to have a big impact on their team this year. It's going to be an especially acute year for that, for sure. There are some specific skill gaps. So I said I wasn't going to go through all of these in detail, but I sort of am now. Hopefully that's okay. Some specific skill gaps around emerging technologies or relatively new technologies. The shift to cloud has only accelerated in the last year, right? On-premise infrastructure is disappearing at a rapid rate. Again, it's not going to disappear completely across all industries, but the shift to cloud that had been, gradually picking up speed over the last several years took a massive kick forwards last year. And now, it's so easy to stand up an app in some kind of cloud environment, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, whoever the provider is. But there's so much quick change in those environments, right? If you have applications that run out of those environments, and you're using some of the built-in security tools. Maybe you're getting telemetry from those platforms that you're feeding into things like your incident response platforms, maybe a SIM platform or something. Then you've probably experienced already significantly the fact that that telemetry can just change overnight. You know, if you're using some of the AWS security functions, they change rapidly because Amazon are aggressively developing on them, and you don't necessarily get warning. You just know that your data just changed overnight, and now you have to re-engineer your security solution. And then another big one is the concept of zero trust, which is, if you've not come across it before, simply the idea that you don't trust anyone just because of where they are. Speaking digitally, so just because somebody is operating inside your corporate network, there is a zero level of trust assumed for that person. Every action that they take has to be authenticated in some way, right? So, and this obviously is a model which suits very much the distributed workforce. The fact that we're now not working so much in within corporate infrastructure. I've spoken to customers in the last several months where their senior leadership have literally said, no, you can't take your computers home, just use whatever you've got at home to keep doing your work. And that may have been a necessity for keeping the business running, but you know, we step back and think about that for a moment, we can tell that it's a huge exposure in terms of security. It's very risky. And so the concept of zero trust networking, where that, you know, that someone else's machine or position on the network or whatever it may be doesn't give them any sort of privilege. Every action they take must be validated. You know, that does suit itself well to a distributed workforce, but it's not something that many organizations are very well versed in, very experienced with. Tool fatigue is an easy one. The average security operations center has something like 50 to 60 tools available. That's a lot of tools. You know, that's and they tend to generate a lot of data. On average, just in terms of data production in the world at large, we're roughly on a rate at the moment of producing as much data every year as we've produced up to and including the previous year. So we're doubling the volume of data that exists, digital data that exists in the world every year. And we have tools that are doing richer and richer reporting, which means that we're just getting absolutely swamped in alerts, especially, you know, false alerts, false positives, that then, you know, cloud the ability to see genuine threats. And leadership turnover is another one, right? CISO turnover. Sometimes people joke about the CISO role really being like a scapegoat in chief kind of role, but it's a real thing. Every time leadership turns over, often you get a new set of ideas come in, and a new model come in, and that's difficult. It causes a lot of churn for teams. So being able to kind of generate stability and build a working program, that's a big challenge. All right, I'm going to move things along here a bit because I wasn't planning to dive into all of those quite so much, but let's look at these numbers of what's going on in the country at the moment. So just to give you a sense of how big the problem is, and this data comes from a website that's called cyberseek.org. It's a very useful website. It's a collaboration between three entities. It was driven initially by a program called NICE, which is the National Initiative for Cyber Education. I highly recommend you look that up if you've never seen it before. It has a very useful workforce framework that we use. We're engaged, we're part of the NICE working group, and we're engaged with that whole sort of process. And it's a very useful collaboration between government, academia, industry, and provides all sorts of great stuff and, you know, framework info to work from. So the CyberSeek site comes from a combination of those folks in collaboration with CompTIA, the cert body, and also Burning Glass, who are a kind of workforce analytics company. So it's a really good, rich source of data. And this just gives you an idea of how big the problem is, right? In the period of October 2019 through September of 2020, there were over 500,000 unfilled cybersecurity job openings in the US, and the map here gives you an idea of, you know, the density of where they are around the country. And the total workforce is still not yet up to, you know, 1 million. So we have a supply-demand ratio of only 1.8 That's our 941,000 divided by the number of job openings, and that's way lower than a lot of other industries than averages. You can see the note on the slide here that the average across industries in the US is 3.4. So you have 3.4 times the number of workers as you do job openings. That's just not the case yet in cyber, because there's just not enough people in the workforce. So this is a big problem. And here are some of the most high demand, we're calling them the hottest job titles. This is not meant to be a go out and find a new job type webinar, but just to give you an idea of what the most pressing needs are. And number one, as it has been for several years in a row now, is a cybersecurity engineer. So that's somebody who's responsible for designing and implementing, configuring tools and systems to build a security infrastructure, whether that's monitoring tools, dashboarding tools, active response, whatever it may be. It covers the gamut of those things. Following on from that, we've got the cybersecurity analyst, right? So that covers kind of a range of roles. That might be an incident responder, it might be more of a slightly more forensic investigator, or not full blown. I mean, that is a separate job in its own right. Following that, we have the cybersecurity consultant, which is somebody who performs these kind of functions, the engineering or analytic function, as a hireable consultant, right? So you can see there's a huge amount of demand here in the market. And then managers or administrators of cybersecurity teams, and systems engineers, right? That rounds out the top 5. There's a lot more. Like I said, this comes from the CyberSeek website. If you want to dig into that, I highly recommend just making the most of it. There's also there's a blog post on the Focal Point website, if you want to go look for that as well, that kind of unpacks this a little bit more as well, just to give some background. Okay, where are we now? So, emerging technologies. These are some of the things, we've touched on a couple of these things already. These are some of the things that are really changing not just the threat landscape, but also the workforce landscape. So probably most of you already know some level at least about the SolarWinds attack that's been in the news a lot recently. Just very high level if you haven't. So SolarWinds is a company that provides security solutions, and their supply chain essentially was attacked, believed to have been by Russian hackers who inserted malicious code into their product, which was then released as part of an update that went to something like, I think, 18,000 customers. Where a customer could be, an organization of tens of thousands of people. Very significant breach, very dangerous, allowed malicious access to thousands of organizations who were using a trusted tool. And the ways in which this were really possible came down to a lack of security in the sort of the DevOps cycle that SolarWinds was using, right? So DevSecOps is the term. Let me sort of back up a second here. So if you've been involved in project management at all, you will know that the classic project management sort of approach is the waterfall method, where you plan out a monolithic project start to finish. About what was it? Maybe 15, 20 years ago, Agile started to appear. Right, and so that's the idea of working in sprints, and we develop like a minimum viable product. We make something that works, and then we start building new bits of functionality each week and doing regular releases, or whatever your sprint length is. It's not necessarily 1 week. And then we've been moving into the concept of DevOps, which is where you're developing. You do a constant and continuous improvement, continuous delivery (CI/CD) pipeline. So your development team is constantly improving a product and putting it into operations in a very integrated way. And this is great for rapid development and bringing functionality to tools, and expanding your product base or whatever it may be as a business. It brings some inherent risks, and the concept or the practice of DevSecOps, in other words, embedding security into that process, is not really baked in with a lot of organizations yet. So again, there's a blog post on the Focal Point website if you want to read more about that. This is something that's not really, there are gaps in the market here, not just in terms of personnel that are available who are capable of doing this, because it's an emerging field, but even in formalized training, the DevSecOps work that we at Focal Point do has hitherto been on a consultancy basis, and it's actually just this year that we are formalizing that into a training pipeline that will be, becoming available. So it's a new thing, right? It's very emerging for sure. Talked about cloud a bit already, so we're not going to go there. IAM, most of you are probably familiar with the term. That's identity and access management. So it has various subcomponents or models under which it can operate, but the concept being that what you're allowed to do revolves around your identity, your digital identity. And again, we do a lot of consulting work in this, but not a lot of formalized training. So it's a skill set which is still lacking in large quantities in the cyber operations workforce. So it's a very pressing need. And then engineering. The problem with finding good, well-qualified cybersecurity engineers is that you have to have been in the business for a good while to be good at this, right? You have to know not just how to do things, but how to build the things that other people could use well to produce good effects. So, those people are still sort of in the pipeline, as it were. There is not a large supply of people who have got to that point in their careers and can effectively design and implement and configure systems that work well to facilitate security operations teams. I love this quote from, we're using it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, right? Because obviously walking on the moon is something that hadn't been done before. But if NASA had looked for experienced moonwalkers in 1969, they would never have landed on the moon, right? Because there weren't any. So they had to build those people. They had to learn how to do these things in their environment being, the technology they were using to get people to the moon, and then their understanding, their expectation of what the moon's actual environment was. They had to learn all of that and build the people as they went along. It wasn't like they could go to, Indeed or something and find someone with that experience and that kind of level of qualification. So these issues, they all point to really a difficult situation, right? And so we're not gonna leave this as doom and gloom, but it's worth acknowledging that this is an industry that is in a very difficult spot, because it is a new industry. Like I said, it's one that contains a rapidly changing landscape. If you think back to previous eras of development in technology and industry and things like that, then ways of doing things were developed. You consider the Industrial Revolution, new ways of doing things were developed, and people learn how to do those things. But once those new ways had been developed, they didn't really change. They were then learning to do pretty much the same thing, whether it was manufacturing, production of steel, whatever it was. There were new things that were developed that then stayed fairly stable. That is not the situation that we face in the cybersecurity arena. We face a rapidly changing landscape, coupled with a short supply of professionals who are under high stress. So it's a difficult problem to solve. Like we said, the gap is widening, it's not shrinking, and it's not just that we're getting more people along with our more jobs. It's that we have fewer people available and more jobs. So here are some of we're going to start to turn this coin around, right? Here are some of the things that we see in the strong teams that we work with and that we are part of developing. So the first is, we've said badging specifically, we use a digital badging platform, but some kind of recognition, right? Some kind of validation recognition of what people are achieving. It's an industry that has a tendency to rely on certifications quite a lot. Those certifications often have merit in specific areas, but are often misunderstood as well by maybe it's more by the market as a whole, certainly by folks who work in recruitment. In this area, it's very difficult if they don't have that kind of background to understand, well, what am I getting if I get somebody who has, say, a Security Plus certification? What does that actually mean? So those things have value, but then they're misunderstood a lot in the marketplace. And so some kind of badging of ability is very important, and that's actually exactly how we do things. We issue badges for particular skills as they're earned during workforce development kind of pipelines. So you're recognizing, hey, you were not able to do this, and now you can. And we're badging you to say, good job, you've learned how to do this, and that's a useful, that's a useful ability, and it provides a return on investment for us. It provides capability and assurance for us. Second thing is career development. So having a plan for progression, right? We are in the cyber industry, we are notoriously bad at not having career paths. You get people who become good at their job as say, an incident response analyst, and they go from tier 1 to tier 2 to tier 3, and they've been at that point for a while, and then often there's a very difficult choice. Like, do I go into management, in which case I'm not using my technical skill set, very much at all, and maybe I'm not very well fitted out for management. Maybe that would be, do I go into an engineering function? We're not very good at defining those pathways and saying, okay, once you've spent 5 years at tier 3, then here's a great new next role that you could take on, and here's what you would need. Here are the additional skills that you'd need in order to be ready for it. So you can actually be preparing those people in a constant kind of progression. The third thing is tool agnostic training. So I don't know if you've ever, I was going to say, tell me if this rings a bell, but again, you can't speak up, I'm afraid, but maybe it will ring a bell. That you get people who are very proficient in a particular tool, and then because of something like maybe licensing changes or infrastructure changes, that tool has to go away. And all of a sudden, you haven't just lost a proficiency in a tool, but you've lost a capability, because the people that you're working with don't actually know how to do that function by using a different tool set. They've never been taught. There's no knock on them. They've never learned how to do it. And we see this most interestingly in a screening tool that we use, and I think Justin's going to be talking about this a bit more here shortly.
I will.
Okay, very good, thanks. So we use a screening tool. I won't steal his thunder. To find a starting point for teams when we're doing a workforce development program, and kind of get a ballpark sense of, okay, where is this team right now? We're always focused on outcomes. We're trying to get, it's kind of, we're trying to get folks from A to B, but A and B are always moving in this case, right? So that's what makes it more challenging. One of the interesting things that we consistently see in that screening tool that we use is when we're feeding people questions on endpoint analysis skills, we see a higher average score in Linux endpoint analysis than we do in Windows. And that, to start with, when we started seeing that trend, I was surprised and confused by it. And we interviewed some of the people. I mean, we do a lot of sort of consultancy work as well, so this kind of fell out as a matter of course, trying to unpick why that was. Why is it people in general are more familiar, the workforce in general, the security workforce is still more familiar with Microsoft Windows than they are with Linux platforms. So why would that be coming out that way? And the answer that we arrived at was that people doing endpoint analysis on Windows are much more used to a tool that tells them answers. Whereas if they have to work in a Linux environment, they're much more used to working kind of more independently. Like they have command line access, and they have to know how to use built-in tools, in the Linux environment to be able to do things like interrogate processes or interpret the output of a netstat or something like that, right? They were much more used to working at that level. And that was kind of the level we were testing at. Do you understand the concepts and the principles that are going on here? Do you understand how to tie something like, a network connection to a process, and then whatever handles that process has, what files is it dropping, what other activity might it be doing? People are much more used to doing that in the Linux world, semi-manually. And in the Windows world, they're used to a tool which tells them answers. Now, that doesn't mean they're bad at their job in any way. It just means they've learned to work with a specific tool. You take that away or change it in some way, and they come unstuck. So doing methodology-based, tool-agnostic training is critical, because you have to understand. The analogy I like to use in our courses is that we're not teaching people how to work the controls of a specific vehicle. We're teaching them how to drive, and they get in a different vehicle, and they know the function they're trying to achieve, but it's just a case of finding the button that does it, or the series of things that will do it. That's much easier, right? You get in, it's a frosty day, you get in a different type of vehicle, and you know, well, the outcome that I need is to defrost the windshield before I can go anywhere. Learning where the button is in the new vehicle that does that is fairly trivial. But if all you know is on day X, push this button, then, and you don't understand any underlying methodology, that leaves you in a very difficult place. And then the fourth thing here is emerging skill sets, right? The teams, the best teams are focused on what is coming down the pike before it becomes a problem. So they're talking to their dev teams, they're researching the industry, what's new, what's coming, what am I expecting my business to be using in the near future, and so what do we need to get ready for? We've all been there. This idea of reactive security, a new business app comes online all of a sudden, and you're like, whoa, wait, hang on, where is that from? And what infrastructure is it running on? And what kind of data are we going to be able to get from it from a security monitoring perspective? There is for sure a spectrum of how good organizations are at managing those things, but we've all been surprised by stuff, I'm sure, in the past. So knowing what's coming down the pike is absolutely critical. I got a last few things here, a couple of things on models and how we really develop teams, and then I'm going to be handing over back over to Justin in just a few minutes. So I want to talk about maturity, the maturity models for developing your workforce. I'll challenge you kind of individually just to put yourself on this chart as you're looking at it, see where it is that you think you fit and how maybe you could get up to the next level. But one thing that we see this full spectrum, right? We've worked with plenty of customers where actually Justin uses the term the smartest guy in the room syndrome, right? That they have a huge investment in tools, and their training plan kind of goes to like, well, then once you've seen what the tools do, you go and sit with Bill in the corner and he tells you everything you need to know. And then that's really as far as the training plan goes, and any future training beyond that is just simply driven by employee requests saying, I'd like to learn this thing, please. Right? And that can be valuable. It doesn't have zero value, but it's very ad hoc, right? I wouldn't say it's flexible so much as just completely fluid. The things that your employees want to learn, or the things that you want to learn if you're the team member, they may well have good impact on the business. They may well enable a capability that secures something well, that enables business well, or they may not. They may just be something that employee is interested in. So there's no way to tell. It's arbitrary. There's no way to know whether or not you are actually developing towards your outcomes as a team. And then you get a huge level of inconsistency as well, because some people will ask for training, some people will not, and you just start to get gaps appear. Then we get to an area where probably I've not polled this amongst customers, but I'd imagine a lot fit in this category right here. So we've got a sort of a basic kind of structure set up. There is a training budget, and there is a spreadsheet somewhere that the SOC manager or whoever it may be has a spreadsheet of who's going to do what this year. And again, this doesn't have no value, but it has limited value. Because it's not necessarily focused on outcomes. It's not part of a strategic progression. There's unlikely to be recognition and reward in it for the employees. So it's unlikely to bring them progression, which increases the ability or the likelihood of them going, out the door sooner rather than later. The next phase above that would be like a qualifications-based kind of system. So, we require our incident handlers to have this, and this certification, and our forensic investigators to have this, that, and the other, and, whatever else it may be. And this is getting towards a more organized model for sure, and bringing a better level of consistency for sure, absolutely a better level of consistency across the team. One of the dangers is that it tends to produce a competitive environment, because if you've got enough, if you've racked up enough of the certs, you then get job X, or whatever else it might be. It doesn't tend to build collaboration between teams because it's an individual experience, right? And there's nothing inherently about it that is team-based. And we do see with companies that use this kind of model, we do see a lot of job jumping, right? I'm being nothing but candid today. I'll say it plainly. I use the term paper tigers quite commonly for folks who effectively fill up their resumes with certifications and then just go looking for their next job, right? That's a real thing, and that's again not a knock on the managers or the employees. It's just the reality of the industry and a lot of how the recruitment works, and it's not very effective. It just creates problems for everyone. And so the level above that, the one we really want to see folks manage to get to, is a programmatic basis, right? And this is what's critical about this, is that it's all about the ongoing development of the team and the individuals towards a set of outcomes. So it involves not just testing, knowledge testing, that is fairly pervasive still in the certification space. Again, that has its value, but its value needs to be understood and not misconstrued as something more than or different to what it really is. So a lot of hands-on learning, a lot of focus around skills. What is it that you need to be able to do in order to fulfill your function in a team and reach the outcomes that that team needs? It involves both individual and team goals. So, recognizing that if the whole team doesn't perform well, we've still got problems. It's kind of like the Navy SEAL sniper training that uses where recruits are paired up, stronger and weaker member in the recruitment program, and you don't pass unless both of you pass. So if you're like the stronger person coming into that team, you have to learn to bring the other person along with you. You have to coach them as much as you're able to, so that you both pass and then you both make it, right? We've all seen security teams probably, or at least we've all talked to individuals who act like rock stars in this space. And all that does is it sort of depresses the rest of the team. It deflates them to a point of like, oh, they can just handle all of that. I'm probably not as smart as them anyway. And if that person leaves, then you're really kind of up the creek without a paddle. So being team-based and working towards team outcomes where everyone has to learn to work together is hugely important. And that's why the big emphasis on hands-on learning, lab-based environments, validation exercises, and some gamification as well, some kind of capture the flag type of stuff, where again there's a clear outcome. It's not just a sort of a cyber playground, but it's a challenge to see, can we perform well in the way that our team is expected to. And then the last thing here, before I hand back over to Justin, is just to talk about how we approach sort of developing a program, right? And so you'll see this dual cycle model that we use: big cycle, little cycle. The big cycle involves figuring out what your roles and your outcomes are. So what are the roles on the team that you need? A lot of people use frameworks for that, right? That workforce framework that I mentioned earlier from NICE is a big one. Some people are based more around functions, so they'll take something like the attack framework from MITRE and kind of use that to define roles. It's not as effective. The MITRE attack framework is very effective in terms of technical coverage, not so much in terms of defining roles, in my opinion. But using some kind of framework is very useful. Then you need to identify the skills that will be needed in order to fulfill those roles, right? What do these people need to be able to do? How do I get them there? We take a temperature, we take a litmus test of the team, and then develop a plan, put together pipelines to say, okay, how do we get from, we've now defined where A is and where B is, how do we get folks from A to B? And then we start that journey. That's the small cycle, is the journey between A and B. So the big cycle is kind of defining where are A and B and where have they moved to, right? That's why it's a cycle. It's not just a line that happens and then stops. It's a cycle. So where's my team now, and where am I trying to get them to? What capabilities, what outcomes do we need to be achieving as a team? And then the little cycle is how are we moving along the path? What skills are we acquiring? Have I validated that those skills have been reached or attained? I'm going to slow down now. I've been talking a mile and a minute for a good while. So if that's provoked any questions, feel free to put them in the question box. I'm going to hand back over to Justin and let him take it from here.
Thank you very much, Julian. You just threw a lot at the people in the audience. There are some questions, but I'm going to get to them at the end as they're more overarching, but they're great questions. What I want to do is talk a little bit about what Julian just laid out for you is a pretty big overview of not only the market and the landscape, but what sort of organizational approaches there are to development programs. And a lot of times, the first question that I get asked, whether it's with federal organizations trying to better the plan that they have in approach, or with commercial organizations like the people we have mostly with us today, is, look, I am probably on that maturity scale low. I'm lower on the maturity scale. I would love to evolve. I don't know what to do. That's the thing we hear over and over again. I'd love to get my arms around this, but I don't know where to start. And fortunately for you, we do. And we're really excited to bring you what we call our starting point, which is our screening process for ProTech customers. So for being on this call today, for being a ProTech customer, what we're offering is a way for you to get started with really no obligation, no cost, just a way for you to start to chart a course. And what that looks like is for organizations that have at least 5 people in your security operation, your security team, we're going to put you through the focal point screening process. The focal point screening process is about an hour-long online it's a test, it's a screening. It's not designed to be highly invasive. It's not designed to tell people they're no good at their job. It's designed to take a snapshot of what your teams, by individual and then aggregated over the team, their knowledge bases. What are they strong in? What are they weak in across 10 core areas of cybersecurity, which we cross-reference by the roles you ask them to play. And what we generate back to you is a customized screening report with that macro overview of your team, but then individualized learning plans. So what we do is, if you think of that model of continuous development, what we do is that third step or that third piece of the arc, which is the assessment, the screening. And from there, we help you interactively design a plan. Now, for ProTech customers, as I mentioned, we're willing to do this for teams of 5, no charge, no obligation. You don't pay us and then apply it to the team, the program later. We will literally put your team through this test. We'll aggregate the report. We'll come back with you, myself and a member of my team, walk through the report with you, usually about an hour-long deep dive, show you what we've learned, show you what the development paths look like, and actually then break down what we think their learning plan should look like. Now, that's based on our curriculum, but if people test below the curriculum, we'll make strong recommendations on where they should go for prerequisite work as well. This value is not only in our curriculum development and our prescriptive learning path, but for most companies that we've dealt with, it is the first time they've been able to look at their own teams from kind of that third level of attestation, right? Self-attestation is, I think I'm pretty good at this. Managerial attestation is, I've watched my employee do these things and I feel like they're pretty good at this anecdotally. That third level is some level of independent attestation, which is that I've tested, quizzed, or assessed you in some way, and here is the information that I learned. For most of the teams that we've dealt with, this is the first time they've ever seen it. And it allows them to figure out a way forward. Most of that way forward, and you can, we'll get more into this, you'll have access to this through ProTech. Most of the people that we screen, about 60%, start with our Cyber Threat Analyst Level 1 program. It's made up of the courses that you see there. It has, each of those classes has related skill badges. As Julian talked about, the badges are a big piece of what we see in successful teams. Recognition for people that have acquired skills and demonstrated those skills. These 3 core classes make up our network forensics and investigation level 1, behavior and malware analysis, and endpoint live forensics. Those 3 things make up our cyber threat analyst level 1, and they demonstrate skills. It's not just learning information that you go try to figure out how to apply. Most people that take our screening start in this track and develop these skills. So we'll give you that report. We'll go over what we see back. We'll show you the classes they need, and then through ProTech, you'd be actually able to sit in those classes. So that's the offer we're making to everybody today. And now I'm going to open everything up to some questions. And we do actually have a couple questions here. I'm sure these are going to be for you, Julian, not so much for me. the first one that we have is, this is a great question. How big does your team need to be before moving up the maturity phase of workforce development? Does this work for small teams too? Julian, do you want to weigh in on that?
Sure. Yeah, and absolutely it does. It's very different, of course, for small teams than it is for large teams. And I mean, Justin mentioned that screening exercise that we're offering at this point is for anything from a team size of 5 upwards. This can work for a team of 5 just as well as a team of 200, right? It's actually, in some ways, it's obviously a lot simpler for a small team because you don't have, you're not looking at such a wide range of capability. I mean, you literally have a lot less data to work with. And you're more likely to have individual specialized roles in a small team, of course, than you are to have teams of people performing a particular function if you've got a large security operation. But it absolutely works in the same way, it's just a case of scale, really. Yeah.
We actually, I would be remiss not to kind of mention this. Some of the larger organizations that we work with, are hundreds of people. Some of the smaller, we actually work with a national retailer who has a team of under 10. They went through the exact same process, right? They screened their people. One screened less than 10, one screened over 200. They came back with learning plans. They mapped that out. They cared about different things, right? Smaller teams need to be cross-trained. They need to be able to do more things. So their development plans for a small group of people tended to be a little more broad, right? They needed to have more skills for those people to cover, but the process was exactly the same. And to Julian's point, it works great for both. Another question here that we have, we can develop our current employees, but we still need to add new people to the team. What do you suggest for new members onboarding?
So for activities or for finding the right people, I think, right? Is that the...
Yeah, I think they're saying
what you would do when you start with a new person.
Hiring from within, yeah.
Let me sort of take, I guess, both sides of that. So that's a very common situation for sure. That okay, maybe you have a team and you have gaps, and hiring to fill those gaps is proving impossible or prohibitively expensive. So where do you go from there? So let me cover the sort of the which people first, and then where to get started. One thing that we've seen consistently in the folks that we've developed is that finding the most technically adept people is not necessarily the right starting point. There is a mindset that is needed for cybersecurity work, which is far more important than technical ability when you're starting out. And the problem, of course, is that people see the technology as a huge barrier, right? I don't know any of that stuff, so how am I going to be any good at this? Well, I can think of a couple of examples that I can't give them by name, but in principle, just to kind of drive this home. One of the retail teams, security teams that we've worked with, that had a small team, had its newest member, when I was working with them directly, had come from the retail fraud department, so literally like shop floor theft and fraud kind of activities, and they had this kind of I'd call it like a detective mindset, and they had no background in technology at all, but they were having a huge impact on the team because they were asking all the questions that the existing team members hadn't thought to ask. So that mindset was hugely important. So actually finding the ability to find people who have who are comfortable working with incomplete information and who like to ask questions. If you've got that employee who's always asking you questions like, well, why is this? Why is that? Why is it? They might be a great fit for your security team, because those are the kind of questions you need to answer. We have there's another practice as part of Focal Point that does kind of this, I'm just going to call it SOC whispering. It's the easiest way to describe it, right? Going in and working with and building and designing SOC teams and SOC sort of environments, and also troubleshooting when teams get into difficulties. And one of those teams that one of the managing directors over there has built in the past was staffed almost entirely with archaeologists and paleontologists. right? Because again, they were comfortable working with incomplete information, and they loved the challenge of investigating something that they didn't understand or they wanted to kind of dig into. So not just finding the people who were technically astute, but finding the people who had that kind of inquisitive mindset. So that's the who. Those are the people that you're looking for. And then where do you start when you get to that point? Well, as Justin mentioned, I would say our curriculum that we offer directly does not start you right at the base level, but we will certainly recommend what we would call prerequisites to our curriculum that go before that, and as part of that, we do that as part of that screening process. So perhaps if it's something like around the network forensics and investigation, for example, if we screen somebody who is certainly not quite ready yet for that bit of training on a technical basis, then we can recommend some things like some specific things in networking fundamentals and TCP/IP, the kind of things they would need to go and learn before they come into that course. I won't dive into any more of the details of that, but that's stuff that we can do. How to give people the right technical foundations so that they can then take on these kind of security functions effectively.
Yeah. There's one more question here I definitely want to hit. There are some other ones, and if we don't get to yours as we're wrapping up today, please don't hesitate to reach out to your ProTech contact, because you can absolutely schedule time with me through ProTech, and we can dive in as deep into all this as you want to go. This question is this online e-learning ? And I'm assuming what you mean by that, just to clarify, I'm assuming what you mean by that is this kind of a self-paced, you click on it, you go through these modules, and you're on your own? The answer is no. That's why I put up this last slide here. These are actually 5-day live events. They are delivered virtually right now. So you are logging into a live virtual environment, and that's due to COVID. Prior to COVID, almost everything we did was in a classroom where we were delivering live in person in small groups. So the intensity, Julian mentioned that we're not that kind of entry-level prereq type of thing. We're designed more for cybersecurity professionals in role. These are small groups, usually in a class of about 20 people, instructor-led and live, and it's lab-based. It's heavily lab-based. So the classes that we talked about and all of our curriculum right now for cybersecurity professionals is live, lab-based 5-day events. So it's a great question, something we probably should have clarified. Julian, any last comments from you as we wrap up?
I'll just add to what you were just saying there, that whilst we were all in classroom before, we fully expect there to be a hybrid approach from here on out. We don't expect to go fully back to in the classroom. We will be keeping live online offerings, which suit some organizations a lot better, and then in person in the classroom offerings as restrictions or the lifting of restrictions permits.
Absolutely. Well, I want to wrap up today, first of all, by thanking you all for your time and attention. It is a thrill to be here with ProTech, and as I've mentioned, we're very proud of our partnership and the work that we're doing. This is our passion, working in cybersecurity and answering the bell every day in the commercial and federal sector. If you have questions, if this is of interest to you, please don't hesitate to hit up your ProTech rep. They will reach out. They'll get you whatever you need. They can also set time with us so that we can dive deep into this. And start getting you the ProTech offer to get you screened. So I really want to thank you, remind you to do that, and we definitely look forward to seeing you in the future. Sarah, all yours.
Wonderful. Thank you, Justin, and thank you, Julian. Thank you both for taking the time today to speak to everybody. And as was mentioned earlier, there's 3 classes that you may see on your screen right now that are those public 5-day course offerings that both Justin and Julian have spoken to. So if you're interested in either the cyber skills for the Focal Point Academy or more information on these classes, and if you don't have a account manager at ProTech already, you can reach us. The toll-free number is there, along with our email address, as well as protechtraining.com is our website. So we're happy to facilitate any questions and help everyone get started on this journey. So, and thank you guys again, and thank you to everybody for joining us on behalf of ProTech.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.